For a long time, I've argued that D&D 5e's design choices make humans relatively weak in terms of civilizational potential, especially when compared to species that get innate spellcasting. I've praised and appreciated this, because I've grown quite bored of humans being the default assumption in any fantasy world. In the 2024 version of the game, though, humans got stronger. Not really from a gameplay perspective. It doesn't affect player characters in any significant way. But as a species, generally, humans are so much stronger as a species that it can be legitimate to have a majority human world, like most fantasy out there. Humans are so much stronger that it might lead to a growth in thoughts concerning human supremacy, in our world building perhaps, and maybe even in our community. And this isn't just a D&D thing. I firmly believe that the overvaluing and overestimating of humans in strange new worlds is a major problem across speculative fiction. So what's actually changed in terms of D&D in the last 10 years that's somehow supercharged humans? Not much. We've the same average speed, the same average longevity, and the most visible, noticeable change is the widening of the sizes that humans can be to better reflect the diversity in real-life human height. The New Player's Handbook describes humans as resourceful, skillful, and versatile. Factors which directly reflect the 2014 version. And the other mechanical change is humans' abilities to re-roll one d20, one test, every day, representing the resourcefulness of the human race. But the basic standard human in the 2024 Player's Handbook gets a feat for free. You may think that's not unusual, as in the 2014 Player's Handbook 10 years ago, the variant human also got a free feat to start with, and more choices with that free feat, by the way. But feats were an optional rule 10 years ago, and the fact that it was the variant human indicated that it was necessarily not the standard. It's a subtle, small-seeming change that nonetheless has massive implications when looked at from a more macro scale. Kudos to this commenter from my Elementalism video for putting me onto this, by the way. Now you may be thinking, well, the Player's Handbook represents the player version of a species. It's designed so heroes can go about heroing. Not every human in the world should get a free feat, but should every elf have dark vision? Every dwarf have dwarfen resilience? Which allows them a core trait of theirs, which is that they resist poisons. Probably most of them, right? I would argue it is an exceptional elf or dwarf who does not share these features. Largely, in these cases, exceptional in being worse. These things, dark vision, dwarven resilience, and human skillfulness, are labelled as species traits for a reason. They encapsulate the strengths and unique traits available to certain species. In addition, all stat blocks that specify a specific kind of humanoid type in the history of 5e have included this sort of trait on them. A stat block of an elfin archmage, for example, has slightly different features based on their species than the basic archmage stat block. It's why Shadowheart and Astarion both get access to Firebolt from the start in Baldur's Gate 3, because of their elven heritage, giving them a species trait access to magic. Speaking of High Elves, it used to be the case that this was one of the only ancestries that provided an individual with the ability to pick from a wide range of spells as a base feature for the species. This deeply affected my world building. For example, High Elves generally were torn between an intense feeling of superiority based on their innate magical prowess, which was greater than all other species, and a more altruistic contingent of elves who acted as civilization bringers, diplomats, and live in mages, itinerant mages and magic users for the earliest parts of civilization in the world. The first hedge wizards who brought magic to the other species. This specific role of high elves in my world's history was largely inspired by the mechanical reality that they have a far greater affinity for various types of magic than most, if not all, other species. It was inspired by the mechanical reality of the game system. But surely, the origin feats available to all humans now aren't as strong as natural spellcasting. The musician, crafter, and healer feat all make you essentially a professional in those fields, which at best can make other people feel inspired and therefore better at certain tasks, or net you a 20% discount on non-magical items, which is genuinely absurd. I imagine, since this comes from the crafter feat, that this is probably akin to something of a trade discount, just applied kind of globally. Other feats help in combat, like Savage Attacker, Tavern Brawler, and Alert. And skilled just means you're good at certain skills or proficient with certain tools. The tough feat is not terribly generally useful, as it requires an individual to have a character level in order to gain any extra health. The same is true arguably of the lucky feat, as many game masters choose not to give just regular people sufficient proficiency bonuses for this to make a difference, seeing as these people don't have a stat block and they don't have class levels, seeing as most people don't have a stat block and don't have class levels. But the average random human anywhere in the world could theoretically gain access to the Magic Initiate feat. Now you could tie that to a specific background, like having attended a magical school or studied under a hedge wizard, but that's not mechanically how this necessarily works. These feats are supposed to represent the origins of a character, a tie-in with their personal experience, their lived experience that has given them skills, made them tough, or made them lucky. So if you wanted to reflect this using an extra rules that requires a person with this particular feat to have attended some sort of institution or have some magical talent or awakening within themselves, fine, that's your prerogative. But on this channel, when world building from the mechanics presented to us in Dungeons & Dragons books, we tend to stick as close to the text as possible here. Which means that for any person, any one of these origin feats is theoretically up for grabs. There are 10 origin feats in 2024 D&D. Even assuming an average distribution, that's 10% of the human population capable of casting 2 different cantrips and a first level spell. Albeit they can only cast that first level spell once a day and can't swap it out for a different spell unless they find a way to level up. Even if, as most people tend to try and argue, we assume that magic requires a rare talent, some sort of specific education or something else, this puts human natural capacity for magic learning ahead of Dragonborn, dwarfs, gnomes, Goliaths, halflings, and orcs, with, on a basic level, more naturally known cantrips than any other species in the game, with 2, not just 1. Elves, tieflings, and Aasimar only get 1, and that 1 cantrip you get is pre-selected unless you're a high elf. It turns out that if you're looking from a macro perspective, a species' ability to cast infinitely spammable magic is pretty useful in discerning its civilizational potential, especially when that magic can be anything. It's pretty potent when it comes to amplifying or just skipping labour. The cantrip is the only spell type in D&D that can be cast infinitely without cost, which, as you might be able to imagine, is pretty potent, especially when humans, if we're taking potentially 10% of them as being magic initiates, get 2 as opposed to just 1. And they can be of any kind, so theoretically the whole breadth of cantrips can be represented in a fairly small community. And that's assuming that not all humans are funneled towards magical education, as a realization is made that humans are better naturally at learning magic as initiates than any other species in the world, and therefore humans don't create a dominant churning mill, producing as many magic initiates as possible to overwhelm the civilizational power of every other creature. Let me give you an example. There is one spell in the game that eliminates the need for cleaning and laundering, spicing food, chilling or warming produce, and starting fires. See my videos on specific cantrips if you want more of this kind of thing. Now, suffice it to say, having access to 2 cantrips is powerful enough, but magic initiates also gain access to a first level spell, castable every single day. When D&D spells allow for things like the feeding of 10 people all of their required nutrients for a day, which coincidentally 1 in 10 people might be magic initiates, which means that's all humans fed in perpetuity if that is society's goal. Enchanting any wild beast to aid you, and make a commoner more than twice as hard to kill, as well as dealing cold damage if anyone tries to hurt them, or detecting magic, poison, or diseases. It's fairly easy to see how this package of magic initiate is among the most potent available to any species at all. My video on Fantasy Police in D&D is a comprehensive analysis of all of the potential practical options you can have with Magic Initiate, and would be a really good starting point for anyone looking to develop this sort of thought further into a specific set of skills that can be portrayed via magic, cantrips, and 1 first level spell a day. But I said earlier that this was not just a D&D problem, that it was emblematic of some broad trend in fantasy and speculative fiction. Now, it's not like every fantasy property nowadays features humans as the most supreme mages of all time. Not at all. The trend I'm discussing here is human exceptionalism, and it comes in, I feel, 2 flavours. The first is most commonly seen in modern science fiction, which posits humans as, to borrow a little bit from fantasy, space orcs. We're a bizarre and strangely tough species who ingest toxins for fun, create entire sporting rituals centred around cranial trauma, and invent weapons of mass destruction that are downright barbaric. This version of human exceptionalism is largely a response to the other, larger form of human supremacy. The indomitable human spirit, or human resourcefulness, skillfulness, and versatility, the exact words used in the 2024 Player's Handbook to describe humans. This form of human exceptionalism posits that even though we're not physically or dexterously better at sensing or acting or hurting things than the creatures around us, our ingenuity and resourceful application of generalised skills will win the day, nonetheless, against the odds. Because we can't stop trying, and eventually, trying will lead to success. The space orcs trope is born of speculation. It imagines a world where humans are not the intellectual or civilizational apex of everything that can come, where certain civilizations have far surpassed us in terms of peace, in terms of social order, and all things. And the indomitable human spirit is kind of the same thing. It pits us against systems, or simply creatures that are physically bigger and more imposing than us, or a tyrannical situation, or oppression perhaps, and states that no matter what, because we are humans, we will survive, we will thrive, and we will eventually come victorious. In both cases, there is an expectation of human inferiority, either compared to advanced civilizations, tyrannical overlords, or hideous monsters. And in all cases, there is a subversion of the expectation that humans are weaker, and we are shown by the end to have something about us which makes us survive and thrive and make it out of whatever situation, doing our best. It seems very difficult from a survey of speculative fiction to create a world where humans don't have some sort of je ne sais quoi, a special feature that actually, in the end, turns out to make them best suited to a life of protagonism, or escaping our shackles and turning the tables on an oppressive world. It's the tale of Mass Effect, John Carter of Mars, No Game, No Life, any number of isekai works, and to some extent even Lord of the Rings. Despite the prominence of hobbits, the undercurrent of the text is very clear. It is an exhortation of humans growing rights to stand in the ruins, stand in the wreckage of the Third Age, and usher civilization into the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th here in 2024. Look it up. Human protagonism, human specialness, and human cultural dominance are all really big and common themes within fantasy. And they become implicit themes of even those few stories which do not feature as protagonists a human person. Even non-human persons, the rare ones who become protagonists of their tales, often have something that ties them to humanity anyway. Whether this is because the publishing industry prefers to have a relatable main character, or for myriad other reasons. There's almost always some twist that they are a half-human, actually, or that there's a little bit of humanity left in them. And I get it. We are humans, and it is easier to write, empathise with, and embody a person who is similar to us. But goodness me, does it make for some dull world building. Because if humans get their hands on the power presented to them in this update to the rules in D&D, well, I feel that uncritical world building, the taking on of these assumptions of eventual human dominance and supremacy, can start to creep into the assumed reality of the game. And I think this is legitimately harmful to the diversity of voices in a fantasy world, especially in worlds that are running off D&D systems, for goodness sake, which have so many strange and bizarre species of people to engage with around the globe. Because in this new version of D&D, humans can do anything. They can be lucky, like halflings, tougher than usual, like Goliaths, have great artisanal skill as part of their background, like dwarves, or easy access to magic, like elves and tieflings. There's little need for humans in this kind of setup of a world to search beyond their own bounds. Trade agreements, coalitions, melting pots of culture matter less and less when this hegemonic species of humanity can do literally anything. 2024 D&D humans have the natural skills to at least compete with any of their rivals in any sphere. Look, there's been a lot of drama in the news cycle recently, mainstream news, of disgruntled D&D players lamenting the inclusion of monstrous species into the base game as a playable, normal species with a civilizational history and complex morality and all of this, as legitimate peoples with individual choices. Upset that the classic evil monsters need to be humanized and wokeified. And frankly, these concerns are somewhat childish and rooted in a nostalgia for game systems that still exist and are eminently playable today. Right now, you can play first edition D&D. They've not banned it. My complaint, I guess if you can call it that, is ironically kind of the opposite. By empowering the human species, by adopting what was once a variant rule and making this a civilizational reality for all humans in a D&D based world, Dungeons & Dragons has ironically killed the diversity of worlds that are authentically based upon its mechanics. It has, ironically, enshrined a human hegemony, despite genuinely important strides being made to create different species with cultures that are distinct and alien and novel from human perspectives. We're left with the strong likelihood that these other species will form isolated little enclaves of their own, where they tend to specialise much further and rely on human trade links to make their civilization work. Because, let's remember, a dwarf needs an entire background choice to be an artisan. Backgrounds, by the way, are made available far less commonly to NPC characters, as they're now bundled in as part of a class, by the way. Whereas any human, regardless of if they have a class or levels at all, can gain 3 skills, or a couple of skills and a tool proficiency, simply by being a human with the skilled origin feat, which, by the way, is the recommended one. Without a background, a human artisan with the skilled feat is arguably superior to a dwarfen one. And if we're including backgrounds, that's still the case, because humans simply get more skills, and more skill expression, and more tool proficiencies. Any human artisan, therefore, if built using this system, is strictly better than their dwarven counterpart at the same task. At this point, the only dwarfen advantage is having secrets of crafts within their culture, perhaps, or living for 350 years on average. Maybe that's the advantage they need. Humans have become a problem, especially for those of us who are most interested in the interplay between different kinds of people, creating mixed and varied and vibrant societies. Those of us who like crafting complex social structures with a variety of different signifiers tying people together, or world building that focuses more on the fantastical elements of fantasy. And it's not just a D&D problem. I mean, if you're not a fan of the things that I'm discussing, then I guess it's not a problem at all. But I personally come to fantasy and speculative fiction more broadly to embody, explore, and experience worlds, cultures, and civilizations that are not my own. And I believe that taking a step in the direction of human exceptionalism in speculative fiction, either through space orcs, the indomitable human spirit, or saying that our role is as an uber generalist and we can do anything we put our minds to, while these might be good messages for humans, I'm not sure they promote world building that actually gets us to understand truly alien peoples who do not look like us, who do not sound like us, who do not think like us. And that's a shame, because it is those types of peoples with which we populate our fantasy and our science fiction worlds that we seek to meet and explore and understand. I think always doing this from a human-first perspective is not necessarily the best way to build understanding of different peoples long term. And building the skills of empathising with the other is only going to become more and more important as we start seeing signs of sapience among individuals and persons who are perhaps not human. But with all that said, I've been Tom, otherwise known as the Grungeon Master. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you in the next video.